Where do you get your news? From a print newspaper, a website, on the radio? In the last 2 decades, the media industry has been trying to stay financially afloat while slashing its staff, and that reflects a troubling trend.
Trust in the news has gone down over time.
As more people turn away from traditional media, how can news organizations reinvent themselves and sustain themselves financially?
We have to change the model.
The need to find out the truth about things is never going to go away.
Is a free press really free? And why should that matter?
I would say that journalism is in crisis.
Our studio panel weighs in.
There's a big emphasis to be first.
Writing a new chapter in Seattle's journalism future. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callahan. Read all about it or don't. Studies show the number of full-time paid journalists in Seattle has been cut in half over the past 15 years, mirroring a national trend. But local reporters and news organizations are working to change that, finding new ways to connect with audiences and new sources of financial funding. It's an effort that experts say is not only critical to the future of the media industry, but to the future of our country.
We begin with breaking news.
$3 billion for road improvement.
A devastating accident happened.
When it comes to the state of journalism in Seattle, what should the headline read?
It's extremely challenging.
Seattle Post intelligencer, columnist, and blogger Joel Connelly should know. He's been at this job for 46 years.
Donald Trump will not allow me to retire.
Beyond reporting on politics and the environment, the toughest story Connelly has been a part of happened 10 years ago, when the PI slashed its staff to become an online-only publication.
Filled something empty in my stomach because I've always seen it twofold, that I cherish the people I work with and I cherish my job. And I still had a job, but at the same time people I cherished were leaving.
The PI now has a staff of 8, down from 170. A frustrating turn of events for a reporter who can clearly see the writing on the wall.
With the advent of the internet and so on, the classified advertising disappeared. And with it, a great deal of the income of the paper. So we shrank and we shrank.
It's not that Connelly and other reporters are any less dedicated to their work. It's just that their work is undergoing a revolution.
We all have a stake in the future of Seattle journalism.
Associate Professor Matt Powers is studying that issue. He teaches ethics and comparative media in the University of Washington's Department of Communication.
Rethink what it means to be a journalist today.
He recently convened a panel from the Seattle Times, KUOW, Crosscut, and the news website The Evergrey to discuss what he sees as a crossroads of possible futures for local journalism.
I'm simultaneously optimistic and concerned.
The concerns are a nationwide issue affecting all media.
Reporting live in Seattle.
The Pew Research Center found nightly TV news audiences have dropped by half between 1980 and 2004. In 2016, researchers found only 5% of 18 to 29-year-olds often get news from print newspapers, compared to 48% of those age 65 plus. And so-called new media is getting hit hard too, as sites like HuffPost and BuzzFeed are cutting jobs right alongside more traditional news sources.
Almost every news organization is restructuring.
Powers says, with the massive amount of choices we have for news, it's easier for people to find options that align with their political preferences, or simply tune out completely.
And so that means that, aside from maybe what happens on your Google search or in your social media feeds, you can be largely just excluding news from your diet on a day-to-day basis.
Idea is simply to talk about opportunities.
Powers points to some of the innovative paths journalists are seeking, from crowdsourcing revenue to reaching out to new audiences, as some of the many ways to sustain local news.
I suspect there will not be a single clear solution, and it's one that I think is really crucial because it will shape in important ways the amount of chance there is for journalists to do quality journalism.
But what's it like trying to change the news media from the ground up?
First of all, don't try this at home.
Erica C. Barnett writes and publishes the C is for Crank political news website And she's very clear about what you'll find there.
I am biased in favor of compassion for homeless people. I am biased in favor of housing, and I am biased in favor of safe streets.
After nearly 20 years working for alternative news outlets like The Stranger and the online site Publicola, she struck out on her own with the C is for Crank in 2015.
And it's financially sustainable, which is not what I would have expected necessarily 3 years ago going into this.
Barnett has more than 500 supporters via Patreon, a crowdfunding membership platform, and takes in donations in other ways too, to support what she calls her style of deep dive journalism.
It's seen as a new model, but it's really not that different than NPR, KUOW asking for donations, Crosscut asking for contributions, or any number of websites now.
That includes the 123-year-old Seattle Times, which has just started a $500,000 investigative journalism fund to sustain its award-winning work in news.
Advertising is not the way of the future.
Barnett says her personal business model might not work for everyone. But she says the job of connecting with readers and gaining their personal support is the story of the future.
We have to change the model, and I believe that the right model, or part of the right model, does have to include directly appealing to readers.
Joel Connelly is part of that change too. He endows a $1,000 a year prize for environmental journalism, named after his late mother, a reporter herself.
So I'm subsidizing my profession.
It's all part of a new reality that's trying to respond to an old truth Connelly quotes from St. Thomas More, that silence gives consent.
Without participation, without insight, without...
A couple questions.
This country can't function.
We're going to take a deeper dive into this issue with a panel of esteemed guests here, including Sharon Chan. She is Vice President for Innovation, Product, and Development for the Seattle Times. Sharon, good to have you.
Thanks for having me here.
We also have Florangela Davila. She is Managing Editor for Crosscut. Florangela, good to see you.
Thank you.
And we have Lisa Blegen. She is Managing Editor and Acting News Director from KIRO 7. Lisa, good to see you too.
Glad to be here.
Here we go. And Erin Hennessey is News Director for KNKX Public Radio. Erin, good to have you too.
My pleasure.
All right, let's launch into this here. I want to start this conversation by trying to identify the problem, if we can, talking about the challenges surrounding local journalism. After that, we'll talk about some solutions, of course. But Sharon, your business model has completely changed. And full disclosure, I am a subscriber to the Seattle Times.
Thank you.
My paper's gotten a little thinner than it's used to be. But give us an overview of the challenges that the Times has been facing over the past 10, 15 years. A number of local papers nationally have not survived this transition to the digital age.
Yeah, I would say that journalism is in crisis. And it is political, it is economic, it's existential. And the way to think about it is 20 years ago, every city newspaper made money the same way. Subscriptions and advertising. Now, subscriptions, basically what you paid covered the cost of printing the paper and delivering it to your doorstep. What paid for the entire newsroom, photographers, editors, reporters, was advertising, particularly print advertising. Now, print advertising is going away, and the digital advertising replacing it is inherently cheaper, and the playing field is sloped steeply towards global platforms. So 60% of all advertising goes to Facebook and Google now, two companies that do make no investment in providing local news and information that serves the community. So what you've seen is massive consolidation across the country. It's the reason there's no longer a 170-person PI in Seattle anymore. It's probably one of the reasons the Seattle Weekly is no longer around.
Right.
And what you have is, I will say the Seattle Times, we are local, independent, family-owned by the same family living here since 1896, probably the only city paper that can still say that. And into the vacuum, into the void, you have more and more misinformation, Propaganda from Russia, partisan opinion masquerading as fact-based news.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into some of those issues, but thank you for bringing that up. Florangela, even the online-only news organizations like Crosscut have definitely gone through some transitions. Let me know about the challenges that Crosscut has been through to sustain its operations. There was a merger, of course, back with KCTS a few years ago, too.
Yes, so Crosscut is 10 years old, but 3 years ago it merged with KCTS 9. KCTS 9 wanted to become a dual platform entity, and it saw promise and potential in the audience that we had cultivated, and in a way to disperse the news online and via mobile, which is how so many people want to get their news content. We found a nice place in the local media ecosystem, and very much supported by the family, by the reputation that is KCTS 9. We now support ourselves through membership, through grants, but also increasingly through events. We started last year something called Crosscut Fest. Crosscut Festival, which did very well coming out of the gate, and this year we're even bigger and we expect more people. And I think what it shows is that there is a hunger and desire for information and for conversation, which are two things that we really try to deliver.
And some changing business models too, which we're going to get into as well. Thank you for that. Lisa, KIRO 7, CBS affiliate owned by Cox. Tell us about the challenges that TV news has been going through as more people are looking for on-demand news. What impacts have been going on for the station, for the newsroom there?
Well, I mean, 30 years ago when I started working, I worked for a TV news station, and now I have to think of it as a multi-platform news organization. We're not, we're KIRO 7, but we have to be on every platform, and we have to use each of those platforms to their best advantage. So when news breaks, we can't sit around the way we used to and wait for the 5 o'clock news to start and people to tune in and say, oh, well, I guess I'll sit down and watch TV now. We have to constantly be developing and breaking things on whatever platform fits best, and it's really raised the speed at which we have to react to news, especially breaking news in this market.
Thank you for that. Erin, I want to talk about your piece here. You've been with KNKX since 1996. A lot of change since then. Before we get into what your station did to stay on the air, could you tell us about challenges for local radio here during the rise of the digital age here? How does this impact this effort to provide quality local journalism?
You have to meet people where they are. You have to meet the audience where they are. So we provide broadcast, but we also have digital on demand. And what's been really promising for audio news delivery is the popularity of podcasts, which have really brought a lot of the younger demographic. It's a bit of a crossfade, I guess, because broadcast still is very much for us a rich, deep group and community throughout our region. So we value that greatly, but you also have to bring others along. So we suspect that it is going to be more on demand as we go forward.
Sharon, I'm going to head back to you and talk about some of the things that the Times is doing differently to build audiences, build revenue. Project Homeless, the Education Lab, this new Investigative Journalism Fund, all of these relying on community sponsors. What used to be a very definitive line, I think, between the business side and the editorial side has been blurred a little bit. Is this something that newspapers have to do to stay successful?
I will say that the Seattle Times has been a pioneer in developing this model since we're a for-profit, starting with Education Lab and then Project Homeless, Traffic Lab, and now the Investigative Journalism Fund. The first 3 labs were supported by organizations that want to improve the world, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation to Starbucks and Alaska Airlines. We just launched the Investigative Journalism Fund 3 weeks ago in partnership with Seattle Foundation, and it's our first fund that's targeting individual donors, personal champions of the free press, who care about the type of journalism that's critical to democracy, exposes injustice, holds power accountable, rights wrongs. I will say, though, that is just one small piece of what a local newspaper has to do to transform. This work funds right now 11 jobs in the newsroom. We have like over 150 people in our newsroom. So concurrently with that, subscriptions have been incredibly important, in particular digital subscriptions. We were early to put up a paywall and stop giving our journalism away for free. And we're now one of the top 5 regional newspapers for digital subscriptions. And then advertising is also key. Because digital advertising, we need to help local businesses figure out how to gain customers in this new digital world.
Florangela, your thoughts on this?
I was going to say that the great thing about local journalism is we're all part of a family and we look to each other. And I will say that one of the things that has helped us Crosscut is looking at what the Seattle Times has done in terms of getting that private and foundation.
And a for-profit and non-profit model.
Correct, as a non-profit entity. And we were able, Sharon is exactly right, we were able to secure foundation funding to launch an environmental justice reporting, some growth reporting, and even turning to the private community. It was it was a private individual who saw the need for additional arts coverage that allowed us to build that team.
I see.
And it allowed us to grow from an entity that had one full-time reporter to a newsroom now with the merger with 30.
Yeah. Lisa, when I think about crowdsourcing, I think about the different video options that are out there right now, you reaching out to different people in the community for that. In this changing world of how news is developed, and that crowdsourcing piece is one piece of this we're talking about, but how has that changed your newsroom? And I'm thinking about those pieces.
Yeah, you know, when I think about the direction we're going, we are always looking for basically new platforms where we can put our content. So KIRO has been one of the most innovative stations in the country. We were the first ones to do a newscast for Alexa, to develop a Roku channel. We also have an OTT channel. Think of it as Netflix for local news. And we've got to get into those spaces, and there's a big emphasis to be first, to see where we need to be and how we can get there. Now, once we get there, there's always the question of how you're going to monetize that. And I hear the word monetize. That's for the second floor sales department to worry about. I worry about what the content is and does it fit the medium that we're trying to put it on.
Well, no, I'm just trying to figure out a few things. I know there's always pressure from the business side in the world of any sort of news operation, but and also in looking at that, where you put your energy is sort of a piece of it. You know, how much do you focus on this platform versus that one? How do you balance those kind of decisions?
And that's very difficult because honestly, TV news pays the bills.
Yeah.
But if we don't adapt and if we don't put an investment into these new platforms, and again, you're kind of gambling. You're saying, okay, well, when Twitter first came out, everybody was on Twitter. You know, Instagram, Facebook, and then now we're looking at OTT and we're saying, is this the direction we're going to need to go? And you have to dive into everything and see what sticks. It's a gamble.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing that up. Erin, I want to talk about KNKX rebuilt itself based on crowdsourcing back in 2016. You needed $7 million in 6 months, and it happened. How did that happen, and how do you sustain that type of success?
Well, yeah.
It was something you did, wasn't it?
That was a big blur.
Yeah, right.
Yes. Well, it was humbling because we needed to go independent and by ourselves, and so we did a lot of community events and went out. We have quite a large broadcast footprint in Western Washington and Southern British Columbia, so we went to where we had most of the repeaters and the translators, and we had community meetings. So those of us that did go through that, we worked nights and weekends as well as we did our job, and then we'd go out and we'd meet with the public. And what we learned from that, besides the generosity of the region, was that we really needed to focus on regional news. That our version of local news at KNKX is regional. So we will often choose a smaller community outside of Seattle and see it as a microcosm and trend out how they're handling larger issues. And Seattle is very important to us, but at the same time, we can all learn from each other. And there are smaller communities that have less and less coverage and less and less reporting. So those communities are so welcoming to us, and they want to talk to us. And they're changing.
And
they're changing too.
And that broadening is an important piece of this. Sharon, can I bring in here, because I think about the Times, podcasting, video reports, many different methods to reach new audiences out there. Maybe a similar question as I asked Lisa here, where do you put the resources? I mean, how do you know on how to reach out, on where to reach out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think, first of all, part of my job is I lead our digital product team, so we set the course for our digital product roadmap. And our mission is we build profitable products that underwrite our independent public service mission. So for us, it is the way to take these bets in a way that's measured without building out a whole product and realizing that no one wants to listen to it, is we do very small experiments. So this year I started an internal product incubator. And what we do is we do 1 week sprints, and they're about identifying a job to be done for a specific customer, and then building, ideating, prototyping, and testing it with that customer at the end of that week.
I see. Okay.
So we've done 3 cycles of it, and then at the end of it, the goal is not to decide we're going to build the product with 2 developers and a UX designer for the next quarter. It's what's the next test to validate the next hypothesis.
Sure.
And
Very
that's
scientific
how,
approach to it.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
You have to. Interesting. Florangela, I wanted to talk about this from your perspective here, the ways that Crosscut is trying to draw in new readers, diversifying the audience there, certainly expanding your staff, trying some new types of reporting with some recent college grads. Talk to us about what Crosscut's doing here to reach out.
Sure. So echoing again what Sharon did, we have a similar, org-wide, we also have a similar incubator to kind of look at different potential models. But we launched in terms of the journalism, we launched a fellowship program, an emerging fellowship program that we're hoping to expand to diversify the staff. That's been very intentional as it has become increasingly a priority for all newsrooms. One thing we're experimenting with is delivering content in a language other than English. So we published a story that, thank you for flashing that. That was a story that was published in Spanish. With some of the foundation and private funding, we've been able to kind of do a little bit deeper dive in terms of environmental justice coverage, growth. And we're excited about, we're in the middle of hiring a reporter, a little bit like what Erin was saying, is we're looking at statewide. We know who's able to cover what, where Seattle, the metropolitan area, is heavily saturated with great reporters. But what about Central Washington, Eastern Washington, on that side of the mountain that has such robust topic areas that are of interest to this side, and vice versa. So we're in the middle of hiring a multimedia journalist in Central Washington, and our goal is to keep expanding and possibly, I would love it if we had a reporter based in Spokane.
That's the next
or
phase.
Bellingham.
Sure.
I mean, you're able to go out and send reporters to these areas, but you also know that having a dedicated person in those areas is going to just lead to better coverage.
Lisa, the question on this, finding new viewers, how do you do it? I know the platforms is a piece of it, but what's your take on that?
One thing that we can't overlook in all of this is the idea that you really have to have strong local enterprise journalism. I mean, the truth is, with so many media groups becoming aggregates and just pulling things from one place and another, there's never going to be a substitute for breaking real news that's local. And so, that is how you build an audience, and letting them know that, you're really out there covering your community, and you're doing stories. You're not just, opening the newspaper. If you're a TV station, you're working your sources. And I have to say, I'm so tremendously proud of our staff, because we have people who have worked not just for decades in this market, but for decades at KIRO, and to have reporters like that with deep sources, there's no way to replace something like that. You just have to break good local stories.
That institutional knowledge is huge. And Erin, I'll bring you in here. I hear KNKX is actually expanding, doing some different things here, adding some studios. Of course, there's digital radio to consider, you brought up earlier. Let us know about the new ways you're reaching out to audiences.
Well, one of our biggest ways is this initiative we call KNKX Connects, and we actually we're going to do it across all day parts now, but we started with taking our afternoon news show, KNKX's All Things Considered, and literally taking it out on the road. So if we've done about 6 communities, 7 so far. We started with Port Angeles. So we did reporting about Port Angeles and that area, and then we took a remote equipment out and broadcast All Things Considered there, played the stories, but also brought in live interviews with people in Port Angeles. So we've moved that around. We'll usually have a community event afterwards. We did that in Bellingham, in Centralia, a number of places, and it's just fantastic. Because you're not just parachuting in, and like Florangela said, if you can get people boots on the ground and actually listen and learn there, it's going to be stronger work.
I think so too. Thank you for all this. We need to start wrapping up, and for this final thought, As a journalist myself, I think sustaining this profession and industry is important. But I do want to talk to you about this. How do you convince other people about that, especially the people, and there are a number of them, that are tuning out from the news completely? Your thoughts here, Sharon.
Well, I guess I'll say that the irony of the crisis I talked about is actually there's never been more demand for real journalism. At the height of our print business, we hit 500,000, 500,000 doorsteps every Sunday. We now reach 9 million people on our website a month, 1.8 million of those here. Yeah. So I'm actually not really that stressed about just growing the overall audience for the Seattle Times. For me, it's like, how do we create that compelling content that you all talked about, right? That unique local content that you can't get anywhere else that makes someone say, hey, I'm going to subscribe to this.
Okay. Florangela, your final thoughts, the importance of keeping local journalism alive and well, and how do you convince people about that going forward?
Sure. I think when you look at Seattle especially, you have two demographics. You have people who've been here a long time, maybe a little bit jaded, and tell me something new. And you have all the wealth of newcomers who I sometimes think we take for granted that they already have some sense of institutional knowledge or know that there used to be a Six Stadium.
Yeah.
So I think we're looking at both of that and we're encouraged. I also think that given the attention that the presidential election showed, that people are hungry, people want accountability, people want the stories that Lisa was mentioning. Yeah. They really want to hold institutions, especially local institutions, accountable. But they're also looking for stories about change, the changing region. Yeah. And one of our best stories in the last month had to do with the gargoyles that were found at a building on Seattle Center and that were then removed and destroyed. Yeah. And that brought in both of these populations, the people who had been here a long time that are seeing the change, but also people who may not have been aware about what this place was like. So I think that is encouraging to me, that those are audiences.
Lisa, your final thoughts on sustaining this profession?
Yeah, the challenge is you're going to have days, especially for a TV station, where you have a massive snowstorm and then the ratings go through the roof. Or you're going to have, unfortunately, tragedy like the crane collapse and everybody comes rushing into work and it's a major, major story. And it's what the challenge is for us is sustaining on the day-to-day, because we know the viewers are there on days where we have major breaking news. What we're trying to do is, with the enterprise and investigative journalism, is to keep those people on days where we don't have that breaking news.
Very important. Erin, final thoughts if you could.
Well, I have a 19-year-old daughter, so it's really interesting to observe her news consumption. And the best way I can put it is I think we need to lead with values, because she realizes that everything that's being done in the city and county and state and country is in our name, and that we need to own it. And in order to, and instead of just complaining about, oh, those politicians, well, someone voted them in or chose not to vote. So we have those conversations all the time. And so for me, and I think for all of us, it's not just documenting reality, it's trying to find meaning in it. And I do think that that is the best way to get to the younger demographic.
Yeah, and the challenge ahead, for certain. Thank you all for this great input, and we will be right back.
I think people are realizing that you've got to pay to support media.
I'm sure the internet's kind of destroying all that, because you get free news.
Is breaking news, how breaking is it when you can get it off of Twitter instantly?
I don't want to PayPal my news.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter and give us your feedback. Before we close today, it's time for our weekly Cio Poll. Are you a financial supporter of local journalism? Yes or no? We want to hear what you think. Cast your vote and weigh in with your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next week, renewing the Seattle Library Levy. If approved, it would go up significantly so patrons can have better access, more services, and even a break on overdue books. But will voters support the 7-year, $219 billion measure? We're checking out the library levy next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.